Okay, let's start the class. So today we are going to start a new chapter, that is plant kingdom, right? So first, before writing the notes, we have to know what is there in this chapter. Kenuka dhoroner questions are here and what is the content. So talking about plant kingdom, it's obvious that we are going to talk about the different types of plants, and plant kingdom boli kowa logele we have to talk from that Whitaker's 5 kingdom classification. 5 kingdom classification ki asile we have already discussed in biological classification, right? So when we talk about plants, all the plants that we see today has been categorized under certain groups. We use a term that is called as primitive plants and something called as the advanced plants. Whenever we talk about the most primitive plants, we talk about the group called as Algae, and whenever we talk about the most advanced group, obviously that is angiosperms. Talking about angiosperms, again angiosperms has been divided into 2 groups, that is monocots and dicots. So monocots or dicots are bitter. By now we understand the kuntu advanced soil. Obviously the monocots are more advanced than the dicots. What are the reasons behind? We will be discussing later, right? Next, talking about algae. So first part of the lesson or first part of the class will be our introduction to this lesson. So we will be writing certain notes regarding certain points like jeneke dutaman word ase hekini ami likhilom, tapsot something related with taxonomy also. No doubt we have done taxonomy in living world, some point of classification, some types of classification we have done in biological classification also. Kintu aru kisuman points ase classification related junkini ki ami first part of the lesson or likhilom, and after that we are going to discuss or we are going to start with algae. Right. So algae again, I think you all know that classification পঢ়িব লাগে, types of algae পঢ়িব লাগে, 3 types of algae to be precise. Obviously there are 4 types, but 4 types among nalage. So green algae, brown algae and red algae, and all the important points about that. Similarly, as we are talking about the plant kingdom, অকল এইটো কৈ থৈ দিলে নহব যে algae is primitive and angiosperms is advanced. What are the conditions, what are the factors because of which a category of plants is considered as ancient but primitive বুলি কিহৰ কাৰণে consider কৰিছে, এটা প্লান্টক আমি advanced বুলি কেতিয়া consider কৰিম? So these are the points also we need to talk. Next is, in this chapter we come across certain words called as gametophyte and sporophyte, right? Another word, thallophyte, right? There a phyte word to course, so obviously phyte mane ki nothing but plants, right? So sporophyte, gametophyte, thallophyte, right? So questions ahibo pare. Suppose if you are talking about bryophyte or maybe you are talking about a pteridophyte, that maybe the first question might be the plant body of a bryophyte is called as, or maybe the plant body of a pteridophyte is called as. You have to choose between the 2 words, that is sporophyte and a gametophyte. Adult plant body gametophyte ketia kom, adult plant body sporophyte ketia kom. Gametophyte jodi hoy, what would be the characteristics, and sporophyte hoy jodi, what would be the characteristics. Apart from that, obviously we have to talk about the life cycle. Right, life cycle boli kore, 2 of the life cycle we have already studied, no? Haplontic and diplontic. These are the 2 things we have studied from Protista itself, right? So what is haplontic, what is diplontic? Haplontic is also called as, diplontic is also called as. This is the point we have already covered. In case of plants, we see something called as diplohaplontic or haplodiplontic. So we will be using a word that is called as alternation of generation. Right. So alternation of generation is something that is seen in case of all the groups of plants, generally when we are talking about the higher plants, right? Jeneke jedi plant body to gametophyte hoy, tahator life cycle or bhitorot kisuman sporophytic phase o thakibo. Thik teneke, if the plant body is a sporophyte, then in their life cycle there will be certain phases which will represent the gametophytic generation. Jihetu duita generation thakibo, will be using a word that is called as alternation of generation. Next, what is important is the respective examples of all the classes or all the groups. Algae boli kole kisuman examples important, bryophytes or kisuman examples important. Next is algae, out of all the examples that we will discuss, maximum question has been asked about chlorella. I think we know, no? Space algae boli kak koi, chlorella koi, right? So maximum question has been asked about chlorella or maybe about spirogyra. Right? So ekhini hol important point. Talking about bryophytes, obviously bryophytes are best example ki hoy. Whenever we talk about bryophyte, what is the only example that we remember? Obviously there are so many examples, right? Kintu eta example amar khoday monot thake, bryophyte boli kole it's nothing but moss, right? Similarly, if you talk about pteridophyte, what is the best example that we remember? Ferns. If you talk about gymnosperms, what is the best example we remember? Gymnosperms boli kole kuntu example monot pore? Cycas and pinus. Right? Now that does not mean the entire group of bryophyte consists only of moss. Entire group of pteridophyte or they are called ferns se thakibo, not necessary. But why is it like this that we remember these examples more frequently or more commonly? Because these are the members of, or these are the most advanced member of that group. Bryophyte বুলি ক'লে তাত বহুত examples থাকিব, বহুত plants থাকিব, lower bryophyte, higher bryophyte, but it is generally the higher plant that we remember, right? Moss is an example of the highest bryophyte. কিন্তু mossতকে তোমাৰ lower plants ও থাকে, lower bryophytes ও থাকে, ঠিক তেনেকৈ pteridophytes তো বহুত examples আছে, lycopodium আছে, selaginella আছে, dryopteris আছে, teris আছে, right? Why is it fern that we remember? Because that is the most advanced member of that group. Similarly, in case of gymnosperms also, बहुत examples, why is it only cycas and pinus? Because those are supposed to be the most advanced. Next, before starting the lesson, what you need to remember is when we are talking about these different groups, no, we'll be comparing the different groups, keneke evolution hoise. Algae pisot, the next group ki hoy, bryophytes. Primitive plants boli kole ki jano, algae. So algae pra gradually evolve hoi pelai ki form korise, bryophytes. So there should be certain characteristics also, right? Similarly, from bryophytes, the next group that has evolved from bryophytes is pteridophytes, and we see the evolution. One point that you have to remember is whenever we talk about the groups, no, especially we talk about, maybe if you are talking about bryophytes or pteridophytes or gymnosperms, up till now what we know, je jikono eta groupor ki thakibo, lower members thakibo, higher members thakibo, thik teneki yato ki thakibo, kisman lower members thakibo, higher members thakibo. Similar is the explanation over here also, lower members, higher members. What we need to know, we have to talk about the evolution, and while talking about the evolution, we will see that the higher member of one group has certain similarity with the lower member of the next group, right? Similarly, ako gymnosperms er pisat ki ahibo, angiosperms are jonto lower member, gymnosperms are jonto higher member, tar logot ki thakibo, similarity. This similarity talks about what? This similarities talks about the evolution of the plant kingdom, right? And similarities boli kole, what are the similarities? Ami kotha patibo laibo. Generally, questions has been asked between something about ferns, something about cycas, the relation between fern and cycas, right? Fern ki hoy, the most advanced family, advanced member of pteridophytes. Cycas ki hoy, gymnosperms. So fernor pora jedi hey group to pora jedi gymnosperm evolve korise, all of a sudden different hoy jabo nware to, kisuman to similarity thakibo, some connecting characters, right? So we have to talk about certain characteristics of fern that is seen both in case of a fern and also in case of a cycas. Adult plant of fern boli ketia kom, you cannot be calling each and every plant as a fern. To be a fern, it has to have certain characteristics of a fern, right? What are the characteristics of a fern? Pteridophyte ami jetia porim, we'll be discussing at that time. So as of now, this is the thing that you need to remember. Since we are talking about evolution, eta group of plant anto group or logot kisuman points of similarity thakibo, and that will talk about the evolution. So this is the content. Examples important, alternation of generation important, or specific examples. Gutebilak examples nalake. Eta jetia jeneke, if I say about algae, I said chlorella spirulina important, right? Similarly, if I talk about gymnosperms, I said cycas and pinus important. Next, bryophytes or moss. Then you have to talk about the moss capsule also. How does the capsule look like? What are the contents of a capsule, etc. Next, talking about bryophyte, one example that is very, very important from examination point of view. I think you have heard something called as sphagnum. Sphagnum khunisa, right? Sphagnum more uporte maximum questions ahe, right? Thik teneke bryophytes hol, pteridophytes or maximum question ki or uport ahe, dryopteris ba teris. Aru eta comparison between selaginella and fern. Pteridophyte duta example, eta selaginella, eta fern, hegita ami basic details or poribo laibo, right? And gymnosperms are baki hini examples. So roughly this is the content. So we'll start writing the notes. Talking about the plant kingdom, no? The entire plant kingdom is broadly divided into two categories. Plant kingdom of jiman bilak plants ase no, gutei plants bilakok duta category divide korise. We have two terms for that. One is called as cryptogam and the other is called as phanerogam. So what we understand, the non-flowering plants and the flowering plants. So that is the point that we'll write first. So basic sentence of likhi nathako, because it's only the point that you have to remember. Sentence ami na jao, ha? Okay, so these two words cryptogamy and phanerogamy. Now you have to know that cryptogamy buli kole kunbilak plants cryptogams or bhitorot pore aru kunbilak plants phanerogams or bhitorot pore. So when we talk about cryptogams, out of the 5 groups of plants ki asile algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms or angiosperms. Out of this, some would be included in cryptogamy, some would be included in phanerogamy. So cryptogamy ki ahibo? Algae ahibo, and the plant body of algae is called as ki? Yeah, thallus, and so the plant is called as thallophyte, right? So the thallophyte would be included here. Next is the next group. Right, this is something that we know. And talking about phanerogams, the plants having flowers and also flower-like characteristics. If you stick to a point saying that the plants having flowers fall into the category of phanerogams, tetia okoman problem ase. Okol flower thakile cryptogam ki phanerogams hobo niki? If you use that line, you will be missing out the gymnosperms group. Because gymnosperms, obviously they do not have flowers, but they have flower-like structures, and plus they also have seeds. So phanerogamy bhitorot ki poribo junbilak plants or seeds ase. Talking about seeds, I think you heard about something called as a naked seed. Right? Naked seed boli kole kar. Seed to present, naked, ne covered. If it is naked, then obviously gymnosperms are covered jeri hoy ki hobo angiosperms. So under this category ki poribo? Clear? Next, it has certain introductory points. Father of Ayurveda, etor upor question ahe. So just the name you need to remember. Next point is about types of classification. When I ask you a question, classification could be of how many types? Answer ki kuba? Broadly, classification kiman type or? 3 types or? Ki? Artificial, then natural and phylogenetic classification, right? Whenever we talk about artificial classification, what is the basis of classification? Only morphological features, right? If you consider only the morphological features and you make a classification, that is called as artificial. So within this, we are going to write few sentences about the 3 types of classification and the workers that were involved in the respective classification. So question kene kya hai? Kisuman workers or ba kisuman scientists or naam bilak di dibo, and the question would be you have to identify among them who was involved with which type of classification. Workers of natural classification, workers of phylogenetic classification. As of now, from the discussion that we have already had in biological classification, what we remember? Artificial boli kole, it's only morphology. If you are talking about natural, all the characteristics except phylogeny or evolution, and if you are talking about phylogenetic classification, then all the characters together with evolution, and if you are talking about evolution, you have to talk something about called as family tree also. Right? Ekhini ami living world or biological classification discuss koriso. Again, talking about Theophrastus, talking about Aristotle, or maybe Linnaeus. There's a detailed description already we have completed in biological classification, right? What are the books they have written, how, what was the field of their work, etc., etc. Biological classification of first part of the note talks about the different scientists and the workers, right? Talking about all this, Theophrastus, we know he is the father of botany, and then we have to remember that point. Next, Linnaeus Jincon classification, that is called as what? Sexual system of classification. Why is it called as sexual system of classification? Again, we have discussed in biological classification. Sexual system of classification boli kyo koisile? Let's see how much you remember. Because it was done on the reproductive structure or the reproductive part of a plant, and especially we are talking about the androecium part. I think you remember the words called as monoandria, diandria, triandria, etc., right? Next, likha natural system of classification. It's also called as horizontal system or 2D system. No specific explanation why is it called as 2D. Bentham and Hooker's classification, biological classification, we have discussed, right? Remember what was the drawback of Bentham and Hooker's classification? Bentham and Hooker's classification had certain types of merits and certain types of demerits also. No doubt it is one among the best classifications, but in spite of that, we don't accept the Bentham and Hooker's classification. What is the classification that we accept is R.H. Whittaker's classification, right? So, Bentham and Hooker as a classification can accept kora nai. Obviously, there are certain types of drawbacks, right? Remember what was the drawback? The sequence of evolution was not shown. Current placement of ki asile, gymnosperms and the placement of dicots. Please refer to biological classification. Thik ase, tate ami chart likhi pale already explain korisilo why Bentham and Hooker's classification is not accepted, because it did not talk properly about the evolution of plants, right? এইখিনি হল নেকি? Nothing to explain. এইখিনি বুজি পাইছো. So some points regarding the different types of classification. So out of the workers that we have discussed, no, তিনিখন classification of বহুত বিলাক workers দিছো. তাৰ ভিতৰত obviously all the workers you need to remember, but in spite of that few important are artificial or কোনবা এজন, natural or কোনবা এজন আৰু phylogenetic or কোনবা এজন. So artificial বুলি ক'লে Linnaeus, Aristotle, right, all the primitive workers. Natural বুলি ক'লে Bentham and Hooker, right, and if you are talking about phylogenetic, Engler-Prantl, right, Engler-Prantl over question ahe. Okay, is it over? Nahi hua, likhi loa. Jar hoise branches of taxonomy likhiba. What is taxonomy? What is systematics? We have covered in living world. Taxonomy is a method of classification. Systematics is also a method of classification, right? So classification, systematics and taxonomy, they are considered as what? They are considered as synonyms, right? Gutei ketai meaning hoy. Kintu classification, why do you classify? To know about the organism. Why you go for taxonomic studies? To know about the organism. Why you go for a systematic study? Obviously to know about the organism. So it has the same meaning. Second is talking about the difference between taxonomy and systematics. Ki asile? Properly arranged, in a haphazardly arranged. Remember we have discussed, we have given an example about sorting out your room. Class on my example disilu, so you have a bed, in the bed you have the clothes, your mother said to arrange the clothes. What you can do, you have two options, either you take all the clothes and dump it in the cupboard, or what you can do is keep, or you can keep all the things properly, right, shirt or jacket, trouser or trouser jacket. If you do like that in a proper manner, that is what is called as systematics, and if you just haphazardly put it, that is called as taxonomy. That is just a very, that's not a scientific explanation obviously, but scientifically what is the basic difference? If you consider the evolution, if you consider the affinity while you are going for a classification, that type of a classification is called as systematics. If you don't consider the relationship between the organisms, that type of a classification is called as taxonomy, right? Basic differences we have already talked about. So aji ki korim, branches of taxonomy likha, certain words branches of taxonomy. First likha classical taxonomy, and classical also, I think you remember whenever we use the word classical, what we understand? Classical systematics, classical taxonomy. First of primitive, jedi primitive hoy based on what? Morphology, right? also called এইটো নেকি এইটো Adansonian Adansonial Adansonial. Did you get the spelling? Okay. দুটা word পাইছো cladogram dendrogram question ahe a family tree based on evolution a family tree based on phonetics right a family tree based on evolution cladogram a family tree based on phonetics is called as dendrogram next the question that has been asked is iman basic questions khudha nai tothapi eta very simple type of questions has also been asked once in the NEET ki question ahise in case of numerical taxonomy or phonetics we know what we use is obviously numerical methods numbers aru codes kisman use koru question to ahisile numbers and codes are used for few characters ne all characters in case of numerical taxonomy so we have to remember this word right it's given to all the characters and reading or studying about these numbers and the codes we have an idea about the organism numerical classification is called as phonetic classification so jikono ekhon classify je number di apply kora ba codes di apply kora hey classification either you can call it as phonetic or you can call it as numerical So next we have the word called as cytotaxonomy. It's easy to understand. Cytological informations about a cell, no? But informations about a cell. You might talk about the nucleus. You might talk about the content of a nucleus. You might talk about the chromosomes, etc., etc. Right? Next দুটা term লিখা cladistic আৰু phenetic. So talking about taxonomy, these are two words that we often hear. What is phonetics and what is cladistic, right? So question I have, phonetic type of classification ki hoy, cladistic type of classification ki hoy. If you are talking about a classification based on what? Right? Then it is phonetic. Phonetics actually word 2 has come from the word called as phenology. Right? Phenology is not the morphological characters or the body characters is called as phenology, so morphology and structure. And if you are talking about cladistic, then you have to talk about অলপ আগতে এটা word কৰিছিলো cladogram, right, on basis of evolution. So drawing of a cladogram is a type of dash taxonomy. It's a type of cladistic taxonomy. Next. According to a worker or a scientist called Turrell, he has also given certain types of classification, certain types of taxonomy. Next point likhiba. Name of the scientist, important. So according to him, taxonomy is of 3 types: alpha taxonomy, aru omega. Mane alpha, beta, gamma ekelege ahe karone sequencer koi diso no. So question ahe, what is alpha, what is beta, and what is omega taxonomy, right? So word kita monot rakhile hobo. So if it is based on morphology, then it is alpha. All other characters, it is beta. So this was the introductory part of the lesson. Now we will be starting with the group of the plant, and the first group is obviously algae. So heading koriba algae. Is it over? Dekha. Yate, according to Turrell, no, you have to know the name of the scientist also. Right, the first group of plants, that is algae. Now, what are the things that we are going to study about algae? We are going to talk about the plant body of algae, that is called as a thallophyte. Next, certain informative, certain introductory lines like, then we have to talk about the study of algae is called as the father of algae, the Indian father of algae, ekini points ami monot rakhibo libo, and then obviously algae in details, talking about its habitat, its sexual reproduction, its life cycle, examples of algae, etc., etc. Right? As we have already said, algae classification kan porhim based on, the three types of algae: brown algae, green algae, and red algae. So the question that is most commonly asked is, the classification of algae is primarily based on, if you remember, you have a chart in your NCERT book, right? Ekon chart is talking about what? The cell wall structure, the flagella, the pigments, the reserve food, etc. So that chart is very important. Maximum questions about algae comes from that chart itself, right? So hey chart konot ki asle? They have compared the different types of algae according to those reserve food or maybe the flagella, etc., etc. Kintu question to ki ahe je jikunu eta algae jodi classify koribo bisarisa, kot koribo, green algae hobo ne red algae hobo ne brown algae hobo? What is the basic point that you will consider? It is key. Algae is based, or the classification of algae is primarily based on dash. Cell wall kobo pare karon sobore cell wall bur different, stored food kobo pare sobore stored food different, but you have to choose only one. It is always on the basis of key pigments, right? So classification of algae is primarily based on the presence of pigments, right? Next, when you talk about green algae, duta algae to already kolu, chlorella janibo lagibo, spirogyra janibo lagibo, etc., etc. Another important point is Kara. Remember, we have spoken about Kara a few days back, right? Kara kami jetia ami deposition on the cell wall discuss kori asilu. We have talked about what? Silica, and silica we know it's present in Kara also. So you have to talk about Kara in details. Kara question ki ahe, the diagram of Kara that is given in your NCERT book. Hetu identification of ahibo pare, and then the sex organs of Kara. Female sex organ is called as, male sex organ is called as. Next, what is so unique about Kara? Something regarding the jacket of the sex organs. Ekini portion ami discuss kori, right? So algae first point likha, the term algae was given by Pune disile Linnaeus. Likha, the term algae was given by Linnaeus. লিখি লোৱা প্ৰথমতে পইণ্টছ খিনি Okay, talking about pigments, so algae bully kole obviously green, though they are photosynthetic, they are autotrophs, these are a few general points, right? Talking about photosynthesis, obviously one of the most important requirement of photosynthesis is the different type of pigments or photosynthetic pigments. Talking about photosynthetic pigment, give me an example. Most common to chlorophyll hoy, kintu question to hoy, is it only chlorophyll that is the photosynthetic pigment present in case of green plants? Apart from chlorophyll to aru kiba thake ki thake chlorophyll A B C hebilak to belek kotha we have 10 types of chlorophyll, right? Out of the 10 types of chlorophyll, the first thing that you need to know is the universal chlorophyll, right? Universal chlorophyll ki hoy, chlorophyll A is considered as a universal chlorophyll. Apart from chlorophyll also you have certain other pigments. Ki pigment thake phycobilin is a word, or it's a pigment that is associated with bacteria and red algae, blue-green algae, right? So, in case of normal plants, no, chlorophyll to thakibo, tar uporte ki thakibo? Carotenes, right? Carotenoids. Actually, chlorophyll thake, carotenoids thake. Carotenoids divided into two categories, carotenes and xanthophylls, right? So, photosynthetic pigment boli khole, it is not only chlorophyll. Chlorophyll and carotenoids in case of higher plants, and chlorophyll and phycobilins in case of lower organisms, right? Aru carotenoids, as I said, carotenes are xanthophylls, and I think we have an idea as to as far as the color of these are concerned. No, chlorophyll buli kole to green hobo, carotenoids and xanthophylls buli kole orange, brown, red, something of that sort, right? So if you talk about pigments, yate ki janibo lagibo the universal pigment. ইয়াৰ ভিতৰত যোনটা পইণ্ট টিক কৰি দিছো আয়েঙ্গাৰ ফ্ৰেচ the name of the book এখিনি জানিব লাগিব So we are discussing the normal characters of algae. Next we have to talk about the habitat. Kot thake algae bilako kot pam. What is the type of habitat? Aquatic, right? So mostly algae are aquatic. So algae code paba aquatic or terrestrial. Okay. Next is about then nutrition. So most of the algae are autotrophic, they will prepare their own food, but some of them are heterotrophic. Heterotrophic or eta example dilu Cephalurus. Cephalurus bracketot So nutrition autotrophic we understand, but few of them are heterotrophic, and we know if they are heterotrophic not a food corpora loy. The most common thing is they are parasitic, right? So the two examples that we have given are examples of right. It a question kene kya hai, give an example of a parasitic green algae, give an example of a parasitic red algae. So you have to know these words also, right? The first point. First, autotrophs jimanbur ami jano, chlorella, spirogyra, etc. So ki hobo autotrophic hobo, they will prepare their own food. So this is an exception. Question is asked about this. Next is red algae ne brown algae specifically janibo liba, green ne red. Next is about this disease. Very important. Why? Because the word rust is there, right? Whenever you hear the word rust, what is the causative organism of rust disease? Generally, commonly ami ki ko? Rust disease kune cause kore? Obviously fungi. Remember the black rust, Puccinia, right? So whenever we talk about rust, we generally have a tendency to accept that it's only fungi that causes rust disease, right? Kintu you have to talk about rust, specific rust, kundu rust. Red rust, ne white rust, ne black rust, etc. Some of the examples we have already given while we were discussing fungi in biological classification, right? So a point to important question to kiya hai, rust disease in tea is caused by bacteria, fungi, algae, etc. Right? So you have to remember that this is a algal disease and not a fungal disease, right? So it is important question I have. Next, ekine likhi lua. Eight whole. Okay, thalloid but thallus. When is a plant body called as thallus? But thalloid, but thallophyte. Kobo lagile plant body to kenuka hobo laibo. It should not be having a prostrate and an erect part. right? It is almost like a globular structure or a spherical structure. Jeneke pizza crust, no crust or nisna jodi hoy gul bostu eta hoy tak ami ki boli kom thallus. You will not have any idea looking into the plant body that our vertical system kuntu horizontal system kuntu jodi identify koribo noaru karon normally in case of a plant we have distinct parts, right? Some parts that goes up, some parts that lie below the ground, etc. But in case of algae, in case of thallophytes, it is a globular, almost a spherical structure without distinct horizontal and vertical features, right? Next, talking about forms of algae. Forms of algae, আমি এখন chart লিখিম. এটা কাম করো এখানে মুছো নেকি? Is this over? I'll write this again. চাৰ্টখন লিখি লোৱা আৰু কেনেকৈ পঢ়িব লাগে মই ক'ম. So we are going to talk about the different examples of algae. Question keneke ahe? Give an example of a motile unicellular algae. Give an example of a motile colonial algae. Or example to dibo, you have to identify whether that's a motile, that's colonial, or that is filamentous, right? Talking about unicellular, we have an idea. Unicellular, it's made up of a single cell. What is colonial? Colonial algae, could they be referred to as multicellular organisms? We have just two words, no? Unicellular and multicellular. So unicellular is something that we understand. What is multicellular? Eta structure, bahut bilak cells thakile etak ami ki boli kom multicellular. Now what is colonial? Colonial is nothing but the presence of it in the form of a colony. What happened? Go and ask. Okay, rest of the students, please pay interest. Okay, talking about colonial, what we understand that these organisms remain in the form of a colony. What is a colony? Colony ki hoy? Assemble. Assemble. It is colony is nothing but a group, right? Group means what? Many organisms staying together will form a group. Many organisms staying together in a group, can it be considered as a multicellular structure? Multicellular boli kobo parim jano? Many unicellular algae, if they stay together and form a group, will that structure be called as a multicellular structure? Question to buzi paisa ne nai? Paisa? Sobe paisa question to buzi ne nai pua? Unicellular jano na jano, eta cell, right? Multicellular hole ki hobo? Bahut bilak cells ekeleke log lagi thaki pela eta structure form koribo, tak ami ki boli kom? Multicellular. Colonial ki hoy? Colonial is a group. Group to kune form korise? Unicellular organisms bilake ekeloge thaki pelai group eta form korise tak ami ki boli kom? Colonial. The question is, he is a colony to tat ki ase bahut bilak cells ase, so can it be considered as a multicellular organization? Yes or no? No. How can you consider? If all the cells are connected to each other, then only we will say it to be a multicellular. Yate ki hoise? Group hai form korise. So তোমালোকৰ চাৰিটা ফ্ৰেণ্ডছে এটা গ্ৰুপ ফৰ্ম কৰিছে মই সেম ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল কম নেকি নকওঁ নহয় y'all are individual but y'all are in a group similarly they are individual but they are in a group and that group is called as key colony right examples very important right so unicellular and colonial we understood no so unicellular hole eta cell thakibo yate ki thakibo je bahut pur cells ekelage thaki pelai tahante ki form koribo eta colony form koribo right next we have the word called as filamentous whenever we use the word filamentous what is that thing that we understand first point unicellular and multicellular obviously multicellular second point filamentous boli kole kenikwa dekhat hobo it is thread like right so it is something that is like this right again when we are talking about a thread like structure it could be branched and it could be unbranched also so examples of a branched filamentous algae example of a unbranched filamentous algae this is the way you will read this chart right protect to example পঢ়িব লাগিব branched or okay I don't have space here so I'll rub this and write it you all can continue the chart okay এখিনি হইছিলে না branched has again been divided into two Okay, so out of the algae that we have said or the examples that we have discussed, the example of the most advanced algae, sargassum, right? Why is sargassum considered as most advanced? Because it will have certain similarities with the next group of plants. So if you talk about bryophytes, pura leaf dekha na pao, pura roots dekha na pao, kintu leaf like we see, root like we see. So a algae that has leaf like, root like talks about evolution. Right? So sargassum or pora maybe from that group of plants the next group of plants has evolved so they will have similar characteristics like leaf like, stem like etc. Talking about the rest of the algae for example if you talk about Spirogyra, if you talk about Chlamydomonas or you talk about Chlorella you will not see any such structures. Leaf like structure to me Chlorella dekha nupua, Chlamydomonas oru dekha nupua. Kintu eta algae jodi enukwa dhoroner characteristics ase then obviously it talks about what? Evolution, right? Next, apart from these three types, no, unicellular, colonial and filamentous, we have another type of algae that is called as heterotrichous, right? A question kiya hai, identify the example of a heterotrichous algae. Now heterotrichous, we need to understand the meaning first. If we talk about hetero mane ki? Hetero mane different, right? Trichous mane ki? It has come from the word called as trichome. Now let's see how many of you remember the word trichome. Kot porisilu? Porisilu na trichome? Trichome porisilu ki hoy? That thread like structure that is called as trichome, right? Especially in case of blue-green algae, if you remember nitrogen fixation ami porisilu. Filamentous to kami ki boli ko? Trichome, right? So we have heterotrichous means what? That different types of thread like structures in the same plant. Right? Normally heterotrichous mane ki? A plant that will have a erect system and a prostrate system. Erect branches o thakibo, prostrate branches o thakibo. Adult plant or jedi tumi different types of branching dekha pua, that could be an example of ki heterotrichous. First to algae ami teneke branches dekhai na pao, because it's an example of a primitive group of plant. Kintu eta group of plant ase jot ba eta type of algae ase jot niki ami distinct prostrate aru erect branch bilak dekha pao. So that is called as heterotrichous. Iman details nalage, what is heterotrichous, what is the meaning of heterotrichous, hebor nalage, just an example, right? So next likhasun heterotrichous algae. Coleochaete. Another could be Coleochaete or coleochaete, whatever you say, and the next is Ulotrix. The next point is reproduction in case of algae. When we talk about reproduction, then obviously ki thakibo? Sexual, asexual, these are the two terms that we study, right? Apart from sexual and asexual, we have something called as vegetative also, right? So presence of more than one type of reproduction in a group is a characteristic of a lower plant. Algae is an example of a lower plant. So obviously it will not have only one type of reproduction. So it will reproduce by three different ways, that is vegetative, asexual and sexual. The point is sexual reproduction present ne absent in algae. Kiho kind of question to Hudisu, because the answer obviously yes, but what you need to remember is out of these plants, no, or out of these organisms, sexual reproduction first ko dekha paisa. You have to refer to Whittaker's 5 kingdom classification. Starting from Monera itself, na, organisms will like evolve hoi ultimately angiosperms form korise. Right? During this process of evolution, sexual reproduction ami first ko dekha paisilo. Which kingdom? Protista. Right? So Protista jedi sexual reproduction ase, then obviously the kingdoms that follow Protista will definitely show sexual reproduction. Yes? So after Protista ki asile? Fungi. So fungi sexual reproduction asan obviously present. After fungi it's plant kingdom. So in plant kingdom also you will see sexual reproduction. Another question, is sexual reproduction present in bacteria? Bacteria is an example of what? It's an example of Monera. So Monera sexual reproduction asan nai. Monera boli kole we have talked about the 8 types of Monera and 5 types we have done in details. Right? Sexual reproduction present or absent in Monera? Obviously absent. In case of bacteria, sexual reproduction present and absent? Absent. Sexual reproduction of ki hoy? Gametic exchange, gamete formation hoy. Bacteria gamete formation hoy jano? No hoy. So sexual reproduction is absent. if in a particular organism gametes are formed during the process of sexual division, during the process of reproduction, gametes bilakor ki hoy? What is the role of the gametes? Fuse, right? So when it fuses, then what we say is the genetic material fuses. So in case of bacteria, gametes are not formed, but genetic material fuses. So sexual reproduction is absent, but sexual recombination is present, right? So sexual recombination hoy kihor karone hoy boli koisu karon gametic karon nuclear material bilak duitar mazot mix hoi jay, fuse hoi jay duta bacteria, right? But gamete formation no hoy, he karone sexual reproduction absent. So sexual reproduction jodi ami protistar pora dekha paiso, obviously in algae also we will see, right? Types of sexual reproduction also, I think you remember, if you talk about lower plants tahator ki thake, different types of sexual reproduction thake, ki asile? Isogamous, anisogamous and oogamous. The basic difference between the three in the kingdom Protista we have talked about it. Isoman and the gametes would be same. Aniso eta horu eta dangor hobo, aru oogamous ki hobo, eta motile eta non motile hobo, right? It's almost over. Common reproduction to likhi pele, we'll finish it off. Tar likhasun, all the three types of reproduction is seen. Okay, give me an example of algae that will undergo reproduction by vegetative means. Vegetative reproduction boli kole, what is the common thing that you remember? Types of vegetative reproduction. Fragmentation, Aru? Binary fission? Binary fission? Okay, talking about binary fission is a characteristic of dash organisms. Unicellular, multicellular? Unicellular. So bacteria ki hoy? Binary fission. So vegetative reproduction also both say common key, binary fission. One example of a algae that will undergo binary fission. All of agote chart kon desilu ne? Unicellular algae kotha. Chlorella is an example of unicellular. So chlorella keneke reproduce koribo? Vegetative fragmentation, right? Sorry, vegetative reproduction. And if you talk about fragmentation kar hobo? Very good. Filamentous forms bilakor, no? Generally, budding boli kole, the example that you remember, Hydra or yeast, planaria, no, planaria regeneration, right? Okay, true regeneration in planaria. Our budding boli kole, Hydra or yeast best example. We have certain examples of budding bacteria. We have certain examples of budding algae also. Budding bacteria, already more bacteria saba, notes of more already did this. Stalked bacteria and budding bacteria, duta extra bacteria, apart from the rest 4 common types. Coccus, Vibrio, Spirulum, heblak to ami porise, tar upori duta asile. So buddingo, algae budding ase, right? Asexual reproduction to heading kora, sexual will do it in the next class. Next, I think this is over. Okay. Hold. Talking about asexual reproduction, what is the most common means of asexual reproduction? যেনেকৈ ভেজিটেটিভ ৰিপ্ৰডাকশ্যন বুলি ক'লে বাইনাৰী ফিছন, ফ্ৰেগমেণ্টেশ্যন, দিছ আৰ দ্য ৱৰ্ডছ ডেট উই ন'। আছেক্সুৱেল ৰিপ্ৰডাকশ্যন বুলি ক'লে চবতছে কমন কি হয়? An organism reproduces asexually by means of spores, right? And talking about spores, again another two words, mitospores, meiospores. Remember the two words, fungi আমি discuss কৰিছিলো, spores কি আছিলে, endogenously form, exogenously form, mitospores, meiospores, etc. etc. So in case of algae, spores বিলাক কিহেৰে form কৰিছে, asexual reproduction, so that type of a spore would be called as mitospore নে meiospore? Mitospore. Meiospore is something related with the sexual reproduction, right? So যদি আমি কম basidiospore, meiospore, ascospore, meiospore, কিন্তু মই যদি কওঁ sporangia বা sporangiospore, mitospore, right? Chlamydospore, mitospore, right? ঠিক তেনেকৈ algae-ৰো কি হয়, by mitospores. Right, so different types of spores. When we talk about a zoospore, obviously we understand we are talking about a motile spore, right? Flagella থাকিব, right? কিছুমান non-motile, কিছুমান thin-walled, কিছুমান thick-walled. Thin-walled and thick-walled talks about what? Formed during favorable condition or formed during unfavorable condition, right? Echinid is an example of a thick-walled spore formed during unfavorable condition. So during unfavorable condition, algae bilake ki kore, they will synthesize a wall in and around themselves, and inside the wall they will obviously have reserved food material, right? Tahatok ami echinid kom. Talking about palmella stage, we have already discussed. So question I have, palmella stage is seen in, palmella stage is also seen in algae. What is palmella stage? First, palmella stage kune dekhai, motile organisms bilake palmella stage dekhai. For example, Chlamydomonas. How does the Chlamydomonas look like? Something like this. Something like this, right? So Chlamydomonas or ki thakibo, flagella thakibo. During unfavorable condition, what they will do is they will withdraw their flagella, and all the Chlamydomonas will stay or remain in a group. In and around the group, they will synthesize a covering, right? So teneke tahate during unfavorable condition thaki jabo. During the favorable condition, or once the favorable condition returns, what happens is, with the help of water or maybe rainwater, whatever, tahator he covering khon naikia hoi jai, right? Covering khon naikia hoi jai, they will become free. That's the first point. Second point, palmella stage of thakibo lagile, it's very essential that the organism withdraw their flagella at first. Chlamydomonas normally thakile flagella thakibo, jodi palmella stage of thake ba hei group to thake tetia hale the first point is they will withdraw their flagella because they don't have to go anywhere because that's an unfavorable condition, right? Jetia favorable condition hobo, jetia enough water thakibo, enough food thakibo, tetia he tahate eta jagar pra antu jaga le jabo, and in that case only the requirement of flagella will come into existence. So, palmella stage at first point removing of the flagella, second point secreting a thin wall in and around themselves, third point favorable condition at he wall khon ki hoy jay wipe away ba gusi jay and they will again regrow their own flagella, right? So, I think that's all for today. So, we will be continuing with reproduction in the next class also, sexual reproduction heading kori thoi diba. Thank you.
I'll